Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this very hot afternoon here in New York for this special workshop, Local Government Support for New York State's Climate Action Plan. My name is Sarah Goddard, and I'm the Elected Official Fellowship Coordinator for Elected Officials to Protect America. I'm also a former member of the City Council in Rye City, New York. Today's event is hosted by Elected Officials to Protect America, New York, and Renewable Heat Now. Just to give you a little bit of background on the two co-hosts, EOPA was founded in New York in 2012 with a purpose to support elected officials in protecting our people and planet. Our initial big win was a successful mobilization of 1,000 elected officials to call for a ban on fracking and for the state to divest from fossil fuels. EOPA's three core principles are: first, public stewardship. We believe elected officials are publicly entrusted to steward our community's democracy and future. Secondly, courageous leadership. We believe that extraordinary challenges like the climate emergency require extraordinary leadership. And last, but certainly not least, collective power. We believe we have the collective power to join together across our communities to lead our state and nation to solve the problems we face. We are honored to be co-hosting today with Renewable Heat Now, a campaign of leading New York environmental and climate advocacy groups that have joined together to accelerate the decarbonization of New York buildings and homes by promoting renewable-ready heating and cooling technologies. Just to give you a little bit of a brief overview before we get started on the workshop, we'll be highlighting how local governments can support New York's draft climate scoping plan to create thousands of jobs, clean our air and water, make our communities safer and more resilient, and help ensure environmental justice. We'll also provide a policy overview of the landmark scoping plan, an update on the process and details of how the plan is under attack by a well-organized conservative opposition. You will learn why local government support is critical at this moment and how you can help in your own communities by introducing a resolution of support for the plan. And then before we get to Q&A, we hope to hear from elected officials who have already introduced resolutions of support in their communities. And then of course, lastly, we absolutely want to hear from you. I am so very honored to introduce our featured speaker, Jen Metzger. Jen is a former New York State Senator and Policy Director at New Yorkers for Clean Power. She represented the 42nd District in the Hudson Valley and Catskills. And in the state Senate, Jen was a leading voice on the climate crisis and was an active member of the Senate's working group for the groundbreaking 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Prior to serving in the state Senate, Jen served for over a decade in local government as a council member in the town of Rosendale. She's also a co-founder and director of Citizens for Local Power, an organization helping communities shift to a locally based clean energy economy. We're also thrilled to have worked with Jen over the last decade on a variety of climate-focused initiatives. So without further ado, please take it away, Jen. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And I want to thank also our hosts today, Elected Officials to Protect America and the Renewable Heat Now Coalition, for all of your work. It's great to be here with local elected leaders from across the state. Some of my best memories are from serving in local government, but I also very much understand the needs and challenges of and the diversity of challenges across the state for local governments, and really have a deep appreciation for all that you do in the service of your communities. There is no greater challenge than addressing climate change, both to reduce the severity of it, as well as to prepare our communities for the impacts from current and past greenhouse gas emissions. We have no time to lose in addressing this issue. We know from the most recent scientific assessment of the International Panel on Climate Change that it is already causing dangerous and widespread disruption in nature and affecting the lives of billions of people. Now, we also we hardly need a report to know this because we're seeing it ourselves. We're experiencing impacts. We're reading about it now almost daily in the news. In recent weeks, over 65 million Americans, that's like 20% of the population of the contiguous United States, have been experiencing dangerous levels of heat. And tomorrow, actually, here in the Hudson Valley, the heat index values are expected to be somewhere between 101 and 103 degrees. In other parts of the world, in the past month in Europe, they experienced unprecedented temperatures, heat wave that they were just not prepared for. Over 1,000 people died from the heat alone, and wildfires, ravaged a number of countries. Again, something they really don't experience there. And in Iran, they reached, I think it was in June, temperatures reached 126 degrees. I mean, that is a temperature at which you can cook food, So, this is, I know, very bleak news, but it's not throw your hands up in despair news, because every bit of emissions reduction we achieve has an impact. And this is one of the key messages of the most recent scientific assessment of the IPCC. And thankfully, we have solutions. A New York State commissioned analysis that was done for the scoping plan, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes, concluded that the needed reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are not only technically feasible, but they will deliver many benefits to New Yorkers beyond the climate benefits, including improving public health and quality of life, and creating truly unprecedented economic and job opportunities in every region across the state. As local leaders, you are in a position to take actions that can meaningfully tackle climate change and help protect the well-being of your communities, your current community members, and future generations of community members. And many of you have already taken major steps at the local level and have been real leaders participating in New York's Clean Energy Communities programs, in the Climate Smart Community Program, or just doing your own thing as leaders on climate. So I want to thank you for all the work you've done to date. What we're going to cover today, Sarah briefly mentioned, we'll just cover the real basics of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which we call the Climate Act for short, and the scoping plan process that it established. I'm going to just, in a really high level, touch on some of the key strategies of the draft scoping plan. And also, since we are all local elected officials here, county elected or appointed folks, I thought it would be good to just touch on some of the recommendations that in the plan that are directed specifically at local governments. We'll also touch on briefly just, the kind of scale of change and the time frame that this has to occur, and also the benefits. I've touched on them briefly. And then we'll get into the local resolution of support, what's in it, why it's important. And at the end, there are some additional resources and with links, and we will share these slides with you so that you can, peruse it on your own. We passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in 2019, signed into law, and it commits New York to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 below 1990 levels, and an 85% reduction in emissions by 2050, with the goal of net zero. So what that means is the remaining 15% needs to be sequestered, preferably naturally, in our natural and working lands, which of course local governments have an important role to play. The law also requires that we generate 70% of our electricity from renewable resources by 2030 and achieve an entirely fossil fuel-free, carbon-free electricity system by 2040. And finally, and importantly, the law is really focused on making sure that we are transitioning to a clean energy economy in a just and equitable way. And it actually requires that 35% of the benefits of clean energy investments be dedicated to disadvantaged communities with the goal of 40%. And we'll come back to who disadvantaged communities are in just a minute. So the law, established these targets, and then it set out a process for implementing a plan to get to these targets. It established a Climate Action Council to develop a scoping plan, and the CAC is co-chaired by the DEC commissioner and the NYSERDA president. And it includes 12 state department and agency heads, all of the relevant state department and agency heads, as well as 10 members that were appointed by the Senate Assembly and governor. And they include, they're mainly a mix of environmental and climate justice advocates, industry representatives, and scientists. And the link is there if you want to check the individuals themselves. The work of the Climate Action Council has been informed by the input of 7 advisory panels, each with expertise in all of the relevant areas: transportation, housing, power generation, agriculture, etc. Its work has also been informed by the Climate Justice Working Group that was established under the law. The working group includes representatives from environmental justice communities across the state, as well as representatives from DEC, health and labor departments, and NYSERDA. And in addition to providing input on the scoping plan, the Climate Justice Working Group is also responsible in a parallel process to developing the scoping plan that the working group is developing or has developed. It's draft criteria for disadvantaged communities, and a draft map of the state's disadvantaged communities has been completed. And you can take a look at that on the website. I've included the link at the end of the presentation. And finally, the Just Transition Working Group is another working group established under the law that focus specifically on mitigating the impacts on workers and communities of affected industries, primarily fossil fuels, and ensuring a just transition for this workforce. So the scoping plan is incredibly important because it is establishing our state's pathway to reaching our emissions reduction and equity requirements under the law. The plan's recommendations are going to be incorporated into the state energy plan, and they will definitely shape state legislation, regulatory decision-making, and state budget making in the coming years. So this gives you kind of a time frame for this process. So where we are now in August, so the draft scoping plan has been completed. The public comment period is now over, and the Climate Action Council between now and the end of the year will be finalizing the scoping plan on the basis, taking into account the public comments that the council has received. It has to be, the final plan has to be presented to the governor and the legislature by the end of the year. And by the end of the following year, December 31st, 2023, the DEC under the law has to promulgate regulations to comply with the Climate Act. But I just want to note that it's not all about the DEC. The scoping plan affects the decision-making of there are many state agencies and departments involved. It obviously touches on the jurisdiction of local governments, county governments, state government, and the like. And then below the line, the parallel line just beneath it is the timeline for the Climate Justice Working Group, which has developed the disadvantaged community criteria. That public comment period on the criteria and map are now closed as well. And they will be finalizing that criteria, but acknowledging that things change on the ground in our communities, people move, etc. That map under the law is to be updated every year. So I can't cover in our allotted time all of the scoping plan. It's a 330-page document. It has over 500 pages of appendices. It sounds daunting, but it's actually pretty accessible. But I just wanted to sort of give you a look at the topics that are covered. It's obviously very comprehensive. It covers all of the sectors of emissions as well as important kind of cross-cutting issues, including land use policies, local government, and the like. So this is where New York stands right now in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions and across different sectors. And this is based on the most recent accounting that was done by the State Department of Environmental Conservation under the law. And as you can see, buildings are the leading source of emissions in New York State. We have something like 6.2 million buildings in New York State. We have some of the oldest building stock in the country. So this is, we'll be talking about this, but it's, a lot of direct emissions from on-site combustion. And then a close second, of course, is transportation. And then, so together, those two sectors, that's 60% of our emissions. Electricity is only 13%, but it plays an outsized role because as we'll talk about in a moment, the solutions to reducing emissions in building and transportation are electricity based. So we have to make sure that electricity is generated cleanly. And then industry, waste 12%. We'll talk a little bit about that too, and agriculture just 6%. So now I'm just going to talk about some of again at a very high level, some of the key strategies of the scoping plan for reaching our emissions goals. So for buildings, the main strategy is to improve efficiency, weatherization, tightening building envelope in existing buildings, and increasing energy efficiency standards for new construction, and shifting from on-site combustion to beneficial electrification over time. So in the case of buildings, we're talking about air source and ground source heat pumps, which are by themselves much more efficient than fossil combustion, as well as other appliances like stoves and dryers, which often are run on gas. In the transportation sector, it's really it's a three-pronged strategy, I would say. It's shifting to electric vehicles in passenger vehicles and building out charging infrastructure. It's the second chief strategy is improving and electrifying public transportation. And thirdly, and of course, this is very important from a local government perspective, promoting local smart growth and transit-oriented development strategies and non-motorized alternatives. In the electricity sector, the strategy is just, continue expanding both large scale and distributed renewable energy. By distributed, we mean local on the distribution grid. That's like rooftop or community solar. And, we have to significantly expand storage capacity, battery storage capacity, At the same and while we're doing that, we have to contract fossil fuel fired electricity power plants, and the DEC will be developing regulations that there'll be emission standards essentially to transition off of fossil fuels while maintaining reliability. That's can't emphasize that enough. The need for reliability, grid reliability, will always be part of the equation. In waste, the strategies, again, it's sort of, I guess it's primarily four main strategies. Diverting organic waste from landfills and incinerators. That's a huge source of methane emissions, is organic waste in our landfills. Reducing with the goal of eliminating single-use plastics. A recent study was done showing that, greenhouse gas emissions from the US plastics industry is on track to overtake emissions from coal by 2030. So it's something that we really have to address. Improve recycling, and finally, grow sustainable industries. Think about things like hempcrete and hemp packaging and alternatives alternatives for these products, and also great sources of local jobs and investment. In agriculture, the kind of key strategies, and these are strategies really that the state are already following, but it's really about amping them up quite a bit. That's alternative manure management that's tailored to each farm, nutrient management, improvements to soil health, it's regenerative farming practices, which have a whole host of benefits beyond the climate benefits. Agroforestry, which is integrating trees into agriculture, and agricultural land preservation, because our working lands are important sinks for carbon. Forestry, the main strategies are increasing carbon sequestration through improved forest management, afforestation and reforestation, especially on underutilized agricultural lands, and expansion of sustainable forest products industries. Across all strategies, again, coming back to the equity goal of the climate law, low and moderate income households and disadvantaged communities are to be prioritized in emissions reductions. And again, they're to receive a dedicated portion of state investment to assist with that. NYSERDA estimates that just for buildings, a minimum of about $1 billion a year will be needed to make the necessary improvements to low and moderate income homes statewide. Low and moderate income households make up almost half of the population of New York. So the scoping plan includes a number of recommendations that would help support local government efforts. These include resources and assistance to streamline permitting and zoning for renewable energy, developing a clean energy development mapping tool that localities can use to kind of proactively plan for and site renewables. I do want to mention that Scenic Hudson has actually created, there's an existing free mapping tool that's pretty great, and Clearwater, New Yorkers for Clean Power have been doing trainings for municipal officials on how to use that tool. So that's something you could take advantage of now if you are interested. Other recommendations of the plan include expanding benefits to communities hosting large-scale renewable projects, exploring options for reducing interconnection costs for municipally owned renewable projects. This has been, I know, a huge barrier to getting, in my area, to getting solar installations on capped landfills. It's the interconnection costs are just super high, so that would be really helpful. Developing tools to enable direct purchasing by municipalities and wholesale energy markets. I think this would be primarily through something like a community choice aggregation program. Increased support for municipal fleet electrification. I think this is also a really important one. Municipalities are going to need assistance in making those investments. And I do want to point out that there's a new round of funding through the DEC for that, if you haven't taken advantage of that. Also provide additional state funding for local code enforcement and energy code credentialing. Another issue I know intimately well. It can be, especially for our small towns that have a one-person building department that is just completely, burdened with lots of work on enforcement and permits, et cetera. That additional funding could be really valuable. Also, another recommendation is to increase funding for forest management and protection, and just generally increase capacity support resources for land use planning to better protect natural, agricultural, and forested lands. I just want to talk for a moment about sort of the scale of change and the time frame we need it, because it's going to, the kinds of changes we have to make are very transformative. But I've included this picture because it's a great reminder that we've seen change on this scale before. This is a picture of Fifth Avenue in New York City. On the left in 1900, when everyone's walking or in a horse-drawn buggy, there was like one car, and then 13 years later, it's like all cars, and you can barely see the pedestrians. Of course, now we need more pedestrians and fewer cars. but anyway, we have seen enormous change in short periods of time before, and it can be done. So after the draft scoping, once there was a set of recommendations from the Climate Action Council, the state commissioned what was called an integration analysis of those recommendations. And they looked at, how far the scoping plan recommendations would get us in reaching our climate goals. And they also looked at different scenarios for achieving those goals. But were some common takeaways across all scenarios that the integration analysis found. To stay on track to meet our goals, by 2030, we need to electrify between 1 and 2 million homes with energy efficient heat pumps. We have to replace about 3 million gas-powered vehicles on the road with EVs. And we have to divert about, 100% of our organic waste from landfills. So that we've got quite a bit of work to do in the next 8 years. By 2040, fossil fuel plants, which account for 43% of generation, must be fully retired and replaced primarily by wind and solar together with battery storage. So the integration analysis looked at the costs of all of this, kind of the costs and impacts, and found that the costs of inaction exceed the cost of action by over $90 billion. So doing nothing is more costly. I will tell you that they are factoring in the impacts of unchecked climate change, which obviously requires everyone else to be on the same page, but you also can't ignore those costs. But a good chunk of the costs are also from avoided public health costs. And again, this goes back to the kind of the co-benefits that I was talking about before. There are an estimated net benefit of $90 billion to $120 billion, primarily from savings in public health and avoided economic impacts of damages from climate change. The net costs, according to the integration analysis, are small relative to the size of New York's economy over time. It's like 0.6 to 0.7% of gross state product in 2030, 1.4% of gross state product in 2050. The reason is that much of the equipment and durable goods will be replaced at the end of their useful life and would be replaced anyway. When you buy a new car, when you replace your boiler and the like. The health benefits of reaching our emissions targets are enormous. As the scoping plan, put it well, in all scenarios, air quality improvements can avoid tens of thousands of premature deaths, thousands of non-fatal heart attacks, thousands of other hospitalizations, thousands of asthma-related emergency room visits, and hundreds of thousands of lost work days. There are enormous improvements in air quality that will come from eliminating all of those co-pollutants that go along with fossil fuel combustion, including fine particulates. The jobs impacts of meeting our climate goals are kind of astounding. A job study was done as required by the law, by the Just Transition Working Group. And the study estimates a net gain of close to 190,000 jobs by 2030. Again, that's if we stay on track to meet our climate goals, and close to 270,000 jobs by 2050. And the largest wage increase is in the middle wage positions. So it's kind of like bucking the trend of a declining middle class over the years. And a lot of those jobs, over half of those jobs, are in the building sector. It's very labor intensive work, and we need a lot of it. So the ratio of jobs created to jobs displaced is estimated to be about 10 to 1. But it's still a huge focus. That one really matters. Those jobs that will be displaced in the fossil fuel related industries. And this includes gas stations, which are estimated to account for a third to a half of jobs potentially, unless they follow the Stewart's model, I suppose. I mean, they won't, but there's no question that will be an area of job loss. So what's going to be really important is to have a plan in place now to ensure that there is a transition for that these workers are getting the training that they need and the support and assistance they need to pivot into other clean energy industry occupations. So there are of course, other benefits from shifting to a clean energy economy. Eliminating dependence on fossil fuel imports. Of course, we're seeing right now with the war in Ukraine, and it's just painful to be filling the coffers, of Russia fueling this war. But there are huge benefits to the world of eliminating that dependence. Renewables with renewable energy the price is stable, right? You have your upfront investment, there is some maintenance, but the energy itself is free. Fossil fuels are inherently volatile in their prices, and of course we're experiencing that right now. With energy efficiency, you're going to greatly lower costs for your residents and businesses, and save money over the long term. Improving energy efficiency is really key. It's the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions, and it also just helps people. In fact, the legislature just passed legislation creating new energy efficiency standards for a whole slew of products that are estimated to save New Yorkers $15 billion over time, so pretty significant. The other great thing about the clean energy transition, potentially, is that we will be keeping our energy investments local or within the state. Currently, according to NYSERDA, over half of the money spent by New Yorkers on energy leaves the state, mainly to pay for fossil fuels. So this is money that can be invested locally, generating tax revenue and jobs. So now we come to how you can get involved to support, lend your support to the scoping plan, and also weigh in with the priorities that are important to you locally. I drafted this resolution. It's a model resolution. It just basically, originally it was for Ulster County, which was looking for a resolution, but which was interested in a resolution, but it's really, we'll go through what it covers. But, individual municipalities, they may have, you may have some specific priority that is really important to you. And you can, if you don't see it covered in this resolution, you can add it, but just to kind of walk through what the resolution does and includes, it brings attention, first of all, to the urgency of the climate crisis. It cites the findings of the most recent International Panel on Climate Change scientific assessment. It affirms the importance and support of New York's Climate Act and the goals of that act. It accurately describes and affirms key recommendations of the draft scoping plan. It highlights the non-climate benefits of actions, which we were just discussing, for health, jobs, natural resource protection, agricultural land preservation, local economy. It urges support for measures important to rural and under-resourced communities, including increased financial incentives for building and home improvements. That's actually relevant to all residents and small businesses, and state investments in rural public transportation. And it calls for a statewide public education and information campaign on the benefits of clean energy, a clean energy economy, and climate-friendly choices by consumers. That's something that's really doesn't get enough attention in the plan. And, all New Yorkers have to be rowing in the same direction on this. And we need to empower our residents and our businesses to make informed choices. So that educational piece is really important. To date, the resolution of support has been passed by, 3 counties, and a number of towns, villages, and the city of Albany, as well as the Westchester Municipal Officials Association. There are a number of reasons to pass a resolution of support. First of all, local governments are critical partners in addressing climate change, and your views and support carry really important weight with state decision makers. It's also really important that the Climate Action Council, the state decision makers, that your legislators, and by the way, the resolution would CC or would also be sent to your your state legislative representatives. It's important for them to hear from the diversity of New York municipalities, large and small, urban, suburban, rural, from the county to the village level and across the different regions, which all have different needs and priorities. The resolution is also a really important public education tool, and it helps to counter misinformation that is being spread currently by a very well-funded fossil fuel industry campaign that is underway in New York as we speak. And I just want to touch briefly on what these campaigns are, who they are, and what they're doing. So I will tell you, when I was in the Senate and we were working on the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, you might, surprisingly, that there was not, of course there was opposition to it, but, it wasn't like the fossil fuel industry was like beating down everyone's doors. It's like they were kind of asleep at the wheel and have now woken up now that the scoping plan has been developed, and this is happening in New York State. 2 different AstroTurf campaigns. It's 2 different parts of industry are underway. One is called New Yorkers for Affordable Energy, and it is led and financed by the American Petroleum Institute, which many of you may know. API was responsible in, beginning in the early 80s for a massive national campaign to undermine confidence in the science of climate change, and was very effective and really slowed us down in our in just getting having the political will to address it. It really just sowed a lot of doubt and confusion. And so now, the jig is up, the science is clear. And now they're focusing on trying to undermine confidence in the solutions to addressing climate change. So API is funding this campaign together with New York's utilities, with the exception of Con Edison, I want to note, and fossil gas companies in New York State. And the members, it's not being financed, they're not listed as financial supporters, but members include some of New York's business organizations as well as trade unions. And the campaign is very well funded. It's they're utilizing all forms of media. There's billboards right up the road from me. And also direct lobbying, and they had a major impact on this previous legislative session. There's also there's a second campaign happening called Smarter New York Energy, and that that campaign is being led specifically by the oil and propane industry, and it includes distributors and businesses selling propane products locally. And in addition to kind of the usual tactics that New Yorkers for Affordable Energy are using, they're actually sending, emails directly to their customers, their billing lists that spread, fear and misinformation, and just actually make things up about the scoping plan. And many of these were forwarded to me by people like, is this true? What is this? Including family members. I'm like, no, it's not true. But anyway, this is a huge issue. And the state is not doing enough to really kind of proactively get information into people's hands. And they're sort of filling a void. So, we have to do what we can to educate our communities on this, and the state has to step it up. So I'm gonna quit because people may have some questions, and would love to hear some comments from communities that have passed resolutions. But I just want to point out, on this slide, there are links to the model resolution, links to the Climate Action Council website, where you can, peruse all of the various reports and documents, the scoping plan, at your leisure. I also encourage you to look at our website, New Yorkers for Clean Power, which has a whole kind of a section. It was a public information toolkit for the public comment period, but still has a lot of great resources in it. So direct you there as well. And I'll stop there. We can start with questions.
Well, just before we get to questions, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Jen. What an incredible and comprehensive presentation. I'm always struck in particular by the job creating and health benefits of supporting this plan. And we really our elected officials really need to get the word out about how the benefits vastly surpass the any costs. If we could just wait 2 seconds before we get to general Q&A, I would love to invite elected officials who actually passed resolutions in their municipalities to share their experience on why they introduced such a resolution. And I believe we have Albany Councilmember Owosu Anane in the audience, and I would invite him to share his experiences and whether there were any challenges or whether it was a breeze through. Councilmember Anane, we would love to hear from you.
First of all, good afternoon all, and thank you so much for all you do. Thank you, Senator, for that comprehensive information on path forward. Again, it was mentioned, my name is Owusu, and I'm a council member for the city of Albany, represent the Pine Hills neighborhood. And quite frankly, over the past month and years or so, there's been a thirst for action to be taken on the federal, state, and local level, particularly when it comes to climate action. Right? The Albany Common Council unanimously passed 2 climate resolutions this year. The first was to support building decarbonization and electrification in the New York State. There is a real desire from residents all across our country. It doesn't matter what county you're in, what your village or town you're in. There is a hunger to see our elected officials do something about our climate, particularly when it comes to our environment, making sure that we're doing something here. I always urge my colleagues, we are Albany. We are the capital of New York. The city of Albany, Albany starts with an A, and it's the first letter in the alphabet. And I think that we cannot sit idle when it comes to some of these important issues. We have to take the lead on some of these critical issues. And we all know this during the height of the pandemic. So many people are relying on local government to take action, right? So many people are relying on local government to take action. And with this council that we have, some really progressive council members who understand that it's not okay just to wait for the federal government to act on these important issues or the state to act on these important issues. We have to act. So when this resolution, when I first heard about it, working with different groups, I brought it to the council attention. And the first thing I did was try to figure out ways that I could get support, institutional support for some of my colleagues. So I decided to work with Councilmember Gabriela Romero, who's a fireball, who's really excited to see on the council, Sergio Adams, another person who's on the council, and also the council president, Corey Ellis, who's also an advocate for some of these important issues. So one of the things that when it went to committee, we started advocating. We worked with advocates. We had a press conference on the day of the vote, and we just made it very loud and clear that we cannot wait for the state or federal. We have to take action right now. I know working at the state level, there are special interests out there, and they work day and night to make sure that these type of policies don't get enacted. And I know some of the challenges that they have to face, but they need to have the political courage to do the right thing. And if they're not willing to do that, we will vote them out, and the council will send a message to them. And that's why I'm so excited that the council was able to pass this resolution, because at the end of the day, this resolution and this legislation, when it passed on the state level, is going to bring renewable energy, good paying jobs, and modern technology in all of our neighborhoods. And in the city of Albany, we cannot wait. We cannot wait. Thank you. And I always look forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Anane. That was inspiration to lead us into the question and answer period, and I truly hope that that everybody will be following Councilmember Anane's lead in doing the same in their respective communities. I believe John Bouvier was first, and then we'll follow up with Maureen Wilson. John?
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here with like-minded people, and I want to thank you for a really wonderful presentation. And I'm glad to see that we'll get copies of that, and also the draft resolution. I'm also really pleased to see that the town of Southampton, we have been working on many of the things that have been discussed here, and so I'm feeling a bit proud of my town and what we've accomplished. We were working on CDG, Community Distributed Generation, and CCA. We have an unusual situation here in that we have the only public-private agency for power authority, and which gives us a lot of challenges. I know that there's a push to make LIPA public, which I know Assemblyman Thiel has been working on. There's a lot of things like that going on. We have some problems with connectivity, I think you alluded to as well. We have integrated New York Stretch Code, and so far that's going really well. I'm very surprised. There's been little pushback on it, but again, it comes down to enforceability. So I'm really interested in that side of things as well. On the waste side, I did have two questions. Two things I didn't see. One is we're having a big problem with the Manufacturers Responsibility Act and getting it passed. That has a big impact on our waste stream here. It's a big deal, but you alluded to the issue of organic waste, which we have a lot of. We're looking into biochar as a methodology to eliminate that. Working with developers who actually pay for the remediation of the properties, in which we can then put in biochar systems and solar and battery storage across our township in those areas where we have brownfield sites and what I call unusable lands. They pay for it. We get lease money. It's so far it's working out. We're doing with Kearsarge, a company out of Massachusetts, we're doing a real comprehensive map of what our carbon emissions are at a local level, so that we have an actionable path forward. And I just wanted to thank you all. I'm really, I feel remiss because I should have been aware of your resolution, and then certainly I will urge my board to support that. So I'm looking forward to getting a copy of that. It's a big deal. We've been following, obviously, the state goals that we want to meet. We've gone ahead of that. We have an energy independence goal of 2025. We're right now doing a comprehensive study across the town for consumption and emissions and all those sorts of things. I won't take all the audience's time, but I'm just really excited to hear this, the way it was presented. I'm very excited about it, and we're in. So thank you all very much. But I do want some help on the Manufacturers Responsibility Act, because it's a huge deal for us. Our waste stream these last 2 years, because of COVID and changing demographics, has almost gone up 30%. We passed things like, banning balloons and plastic straws and those sorts of things, but this is a real issue. The market has crashed for recyclables. We now have to pay instead of being paid, and we actually had our whole waste management system was dependent on that. So now it becomes a budget item that was previously not being considered because of that crash. So we're looking for ways to reduce that. You have some really good things on your slides but we have some other ideas too, and I'd like to discuss those at some point in the future. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate
it. I just want to make sure that everybody's questions are answered. Maureen, and just a reminder that we do have in the chat a link to the sample resolution, but if you don't see it, it will be shared with you by email after the presentation. So Maureen Wilson, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I represent the town of Austerlitz on the eastern side, very small town. I'm on the town board. I'm looking for more information about as we try to move towards using the stretch goal, more electrification. We have some individuals who are trying to say that there will not be enough electricity to support this effort. And I wondered if you could just speak on that a little bit. I don't know if you have a, reference or.
I'm happy to. So first of all, I want to say that this has actually been one of the key messages of the fossil fuel industry. They're really like the billboards up the road from me. You will have blackouts if everyone like this is what they're saying. So first of all, it's not true. There are different recommendations in the plan. The most immediate recommendation, and this is one that the model resolution specifically cites because it is so important, is for new construction, all electric codes for new construction beginning in 2024 for residential buildings in New York under 5 stories. And then in 2027, all electric code would be extended to commercial and residential above, 5 stories and above. And they will also be more efficient buildings. it's crazy to build new buildings with fossil fuel combustion. And it's much cheaper, far cheaper to build it right the first time. And we're talking about these buildings, anything built now is very efficient. And as a percentage of the overall building stock, it's very small. And the all-electric new construction code will have zero impact on reliability. So it's other key things to keep in mind. So there will be dispatchable fossil resources available through 2040, as you know, we're building things out. But there's also the Public Service Commission's mandate to ensure reliable service has not changed. You know, nothing is going to be done to jeopardize reliability of the grid. And you know, there's a recognition that it's estimated that in about 10 years time, New York will shift from a summer peaking system to a winter peaking system, as people replace, you know, their boilers and furnaces with heat pumps. And we have to be prepared. Our power sector has to be prepared for that shift. And that is the work that is going to be done over the next 10 years. So, it was all modeled. This was all, I mentioned the integration analysis. The integration analysis modeled shifting to electricity-based technologies for most uses in buildings and transportation, and did not find that it would compromise reliability, that we could meet those needs. But it's all has to be coordinated. We have to keep expanding renewables. The demand for electricity is going to go up significantly. We have to build out, you know, more renewables, and more storage is going to be really important. I just want to point out too that I don't know if you all have been following the Inflation Reduction Act, or I actually like slogged through that thing, that federal bill, but there are incredible incentives in that bill. If it gets passed, that reconciliation bill, we'll see what happens at the federal level, but there's you know, money in there for storage, for geothermal, and another time when we have more time, I could talk about the differences between air source heat pumps and geothermal. Geothermal is better from a peak perspective than air source, and much more efficient. And now we've got all of these incentives for geothermal, a new state tax credit of $5,000 that was just passed as part of the budget, utility incentives, and then if we get this federal credit, you know, it's going to make it a lot more affordable for people. But this is like a whole separate webinar. But anyway, the reliability stuff that's like fear tactics, basically.
That's what I figured. Thank you.
I would love to take you up on your offer, Jen, to do a whole nother webinar on heat pumps and geothermal. I think that would be terrific. I can see we're heading up into the 2 o'clock hour, so we have one more question for Jen or anybody else from Len Simon. Len, would you like to ask your question, and then we will wrap it up.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Thank you for pulling this together. Thank you, Jen, for a great presentation. In Croton-on-Hudson, where I'm a member of the Board of Trustees, we're doing so many of the things that are contemplated within the scoping plan: solar, heat pump, housing efficiency, TOD, smart growth. So I feel very comfortable in bringing the resolution fairly soon to our Board of Trustees. I'm wondering though, when we do that, if we might be able to ask you to do perhaps a mini version of the presentation that you did by Zoom, say 15 minutes or so or less, if you'd be available to do that. I think it'd be very persuasive to both our Board of Trustee members and our community.
Sure, if it works for the schedule, with my schedule, I'd be happy to. Sure.
Thank
Yeah, you can,
Appreciate that.
and listen, and I'm gonna put my email in the chat. And if people have questions that they think of afterwards, I can endeavor to answer them. I can't promise I will have the answers, but I can endeavor to answer them.
Thank you, Jen.
Oops, sorry. I just
Yeah.
sent it to you, but I sent it to everyone.
And thank you to Jen for sharing her contact information. And it looks like, Jen, there's already a vote going in support of you doing a a geothermal. So
Well, I would bring in the experts for that. I'm a lay person. But yes, there are plenty of people
Absolutely.
that can speak, including Bill Nowak, who's actually on this
Yes.
on this Zoom.
He's the one who's putting you up for that. There will, unfortunately, unfortunately, it's amazing that we have such incredible interest and energy from our electeds around this issue. But we are getting past the time. We want to make sure you all can leave. But we will have a recording. We're going to share that. You have Jen's contact information, but we'll include that in the follow-up email. And there will also be the attachments to all of the resources, the slide deck, everything. I want to thank Jen again for her time and her expertise, and for the energy, the positive energy that she's provided to today's topic. I would also like to thank very much our co-host Renewable Heat Now, and Councilmember Anane for sharing his positive experience on passing a resolution. And of course, thank you to everybody for being here. If anybody is interested to stay behind for just a few minutes, or actually 30 to 45 seconds to be precise, we would love to get a recording of you providing a statement of support for a resolution. So if that is something that you would be interested in doing, please just actually put your name in the chat. We can follow up with you. It's something that we would love to do if that's of interest, or something that you'd be willing to do. But as always, thank you so much to everybody for your leadership and protecting our people and planet. Oh,
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.
thank you.